In Greek, person is anthropos, that's where anthropology or anthropomorphic comes from, and St. Paul thus distinguishes, and this is very important now and for all my YouTube videos, he distinguishes between the anthropos psychikos and the anthropos pneumatikos. We have on the one hand anthropos, person, and psychikos, the soul, then anthropos psychikos, the natural person as he is, the human being who reasons according to the things of this world. In their times we would talk about pagans, I like to talk now about atheists or agnostics. And for example, in that way in the first letter of the Corinthians St. Paul says, now the anthropos psychikos does not accept what pertains to the Spirit of God, for to him it is foolishness, and he cannot understand it, because it is judged spiritually. Then we remember that in Greek the word spirit it is pneuma. Therefore, in opposition to the anthropos psychikos we have the anthropos pneumatikos. Again, anthropos is person, pneumatikos, spiritual. To the spiritual person which is the human being who has had the wealth, the grace, the power of the Spirit. That anthropos pneumatikos has been transformed by the power of pneuma, of the Spirit. And for this very reason St. Paul uses the expression of spirit, soul, and body. And I repeat that this don't means that the person have three parts. No, we are body and soul, bazar and nephes, soma and psyche, too. But if we have the grace of the Spirit, if the Spirit of God has come into our life, then we are more than body and soul. That is what the expression body, soul, and spirit indicates. We are all of us soul and body, but if a person has the grace of the Spirit working in him, then that person is a spiritual person. And this is where we return to the body. And in Hebrew we have bazar, which meant both body and flesh, while in Greek both connotations are divided into two different terms, soma and sarx. From soma comes the word somatization. Again, we must go to the writings of St. Paul to see the difference between these two. If we observe Paul's writings, we will see that the word soma always refers to a characteristic of dignity of the person. There are always positive words surrounding the term soma. Remember that the body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. St. John Paul II wrote, it is frequently emphasized that biblical tradition stresses especially the personal unity of the human being, by using the term body to designate the whole person. The observation is exact. Instead, St. Paul uses the word sarx, which is flesh, in a way that is very different. Let's see Galatians chapter 5. Where here he tells us about the works of the flesh versus the works of the Spirit. Look, he doesn't use the word soma and psyche, but rather he uses sarx and pneuma. St. Paul does not create any confrontation per se between the body against the soul. This is very important to understand. There is no confrontation between body and soul, the bazar and the nephesh, the soma and the psyche, since they cannot be in confrontation as long as they are two dimensions of the same truth and not two separate parts. Let us remember once again that there is no dualism, but duality. What St. Paul does in Galatians is to confront sarx, carnality, against pneuma, spirit. So St. Paul is also going to tell us about anthropos sarkinox. Who is this? He is the carnal person. So for St. Paul two confrontations are created. The first was the one between the anthropos psychikos and the anthropos pneumatikos, between the natural person versus the spiritual person. And there is a second confrontation again between the anthropos pneumatikos and the anthropos sarkinox, between the spiritual person and the carnal person. And what is the problem with carnality? We could say that meat is the misuse of bodily condition. In other words, sarx is the misuse of soma. And what are the three enemies of the soul? The world, the devil, and the flesh. The flesh, psychic anthropos, the person as he is, the human being who reasons according to the things of this world. What was happening to him? That he suffers the consequences of sin, among them concupiscence. So the carnal person is the one who has taken his bazar or soma to sin, and that is where we find the meaning of the carnal, the flesh, which is very well understood from the perspective of what concupiscence is, something I already talk about quite a bit in my other videos, so you can watch about it later. If you look at these two confrontations created by St. Paul of anthropos psychikosi and anthropos sarkinox versus anthropos pneumatikos, they make direct reference to the mind and the body. Pay attention. Psyche is also used for psychic, psychology, psychiatry, and the definition of this type of person is mental, the modern pagan or atheist, which as we have said is the natural person who simply knows things in a certain way. The natural person as he is, the human being who reasons according to the things of this world. And for example, in that line in the first letter of the Corinthians, St. Paul says, now the anthropos psychikos does not accept what pertains to the Spirit of God, for to him it is foolishness, and he cannot understand it, because it is judged spiritually. I repeat, for to him it is foolishness, and he cannot understand it. Do you realize what I'm telling about? While on the other hand, the carnal person, Who is he? It is the person who has surrendered his soma, his body to the carnal flesh, who has succumbed to the vices. Anthropos sarkinox is directly the person who has been defeated, or he didn't fight against our third great enemy of the soul, which is the flesh. And here is where we can understand what the old self versus the new self is. And that we can understand much better the letter to the Ephesians, that you should put away the old self of your former way of life, corrupted through deceitful desires, and be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and put on the new self, created in God's way in righteousness and holiness of truth. Ct. Thus Saint Augustine says, and now I will use my Spanish translation to the English because honestly I didn't found the English text. He says, the new self is born from the old, because spiritual regeneration begins with the change of earthly and worldly life. Well, then let's look at the old self and the new self that Saint Paul wrote about. The anthropos psychikos is the man who reasons for himself, who sees the of this world, but without the spirit. And what we said that was happening to him, that he was like we are, a victim of the concupiscence resulting from the sin. Concupiscence is the prelude of the sin. It is like the hunger that precedes the act of eating. Actually, it is not a sin, but it is the mother that engenders the 7 capital sins. And as we have also seen, the anthropos sarkinox, the man of flesh, what is it in essence? Well, is who in his illicitous appetites has succumbed greatly to the sensitive appetite, to the enjoyment of the carnal senses, these appetites that we share with animals. The man of flesh, and this appetite, this hunger, is the most superficial desire of all. And what we have said about it, that Saint Augustine teaches us that desire in itself is not bad, but that we must abandon the surface to go deeper, towards the intellect of what our deep desire is. It's a matter of going deep and not staying at the most basic superficiality. And it is that in that deep sense where, for example, I tell like that so you can understand what I'm telling about, is there where we are not looking for the eloquence, but instead we are looking for the truth, not for the applauses, but for the love, not for the pleasure, but for the happiness. There in the deep desire we are not looking for the superficial anesthesia, but instead we are looking for our peace. So, if our life becomes a life of depth, and in that deep desire we find the very imprint of God, we will also find that the response to the desire is not the complacency, and is not to deny it. That is, so you can understand me. Obviously, it is not bad that you eat your favorite dish, and it is not bad that if you feel tired then you are going to sleep tonight, and if you want to see the new movie it is anything wrong in the fact that you go to the cinema. The soma, it is not bad, because our appetites are something natural. And in the same way, of course it is not wrong that the Saturday you have a lunch with your family, and there you some rice, and what you have to do there in that situation is take your drink, look your loved ones, look your food, cheers, and thank God for his mercy, and then enjoy of the privilege that he has given to you. Because that is the joy of the life. And that it is not the man of flesh. On the contrary, the anthropos sarkinox is the one who is going to go alone to the bar and get drunk. The drunk. And, okay, actually, we all know very well what common sense tells us about which is the difference between the proper and wrong behavior. What it's the correct and what it is wrong. And what it's the natural and what it's the wrong concupiscence, the desire, and the 7 capital sins. And there is where we find a man of flesh, but not necessary in our desire, much less in our natural and normal appetites. No. There we need only balance and common sense, that there is so much more mystique in knowing how to enjoy a good meal with our family than to many people out they think.